you like me to start now?
That'd be great. Thanks, Mark.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Sharon, for having me, and for the Friends of the Samuels Public Library for giving us this opportunity to speak about the Shenandoah River. I am the Shenandoah Riverkeeper and part of the Potomac Riverkeeper Network, and our mission is really twofold. One is to protect the Shenandoah and protect the Potomac, and also to promote river access and recreation. We are a non-governmental organization, and unlike some friends groups that do excellent work and do great work, Friends of the North Fork, Friends of the Shenandoah, we sometimes distinguish ourselves from friends groups in that we are willing to go to court and to litigate in order to protect the river if need be. And so that is a distinguishing feature. And most of our legal authority comes from, on the federal level, the Clean Water Act. And on the state level, we also have the Virginia Agricultural Stewardship Act that allows us to file complaints against non-point source polluters. And so we are a nonprofit, and you know, like many nonprofits, we're always looking for new members. I will just jump over, and if I can for a second, see if this works. Okay, does everybody see that? Respect the Shenandoah? Good, great. Thank you. So this is about our Respect the Shenandoah campaign. And just want to give you a little bit of an overview in terms of what the campaign's about and what we're trying to accomplish. But I think it's important that we do a little background information and sharing beforehand so you can put everything in proper context. We've been working and dealing with heavy algal blooms in the Shenandoah River system, the North Fork, South Fork, and the main stem for some time. And so I think it would be worthwhile for some people that may not have a knowledge base on subaquatic vegetation, good grasses, and algae, and what the difference is. And also just want to touch a little bit about the history of our work dealing with algae and where we are currently today. And then want to from then proceed to the campaign itself and talk about the goals of the Respect the Shenandoah campaign, our approach. And here you see Water Reporter is key. The Water Reporter is an app on your smartphone, you know, your iPhone or your Android or whatever, and it's integral to our campaign. And then I just want to just touch upon our opportunities and next steps for the campaign and where we would like to go from here. Just real briefly, just a real quick botany lesson. The difference between grass and algae is grasses have a root system. They pull and hold sediment and dirt and nutrients. They're very beneficial to the river system, and algae has no root structure at all, and it's just free floating for the most part. Sometimes it will attach itself to the bottom, but it can very easily release and let go, and so there's no root system. Here is a picture of stargrass. Many folks will see stargrass in the river system, and it's just a very beneficial plant and easily identifiable by the pretty yellow star that's right there in the center. Another one is wild celery. Wild celery is often confused and called eelgrass, but technically speaking, eelgrass grows in saltwater or in brackish water. And so what we see on the Shenandoah system is wild celery. In addition to wild celery, there's Elodia, there's coontail milfoil, duckweed, pondweed, all sorts of subaquatic vegetation. And oftentimes people ask, why subaquatic vegetation so important? And it provides so many benefits. I mean, one of them is it provides a nursery for critters living in the river itself, crayfish and snails and all sorts of animals, and fish fry use it and as a nursery. It pulls out nutrients and sediments from the water column. And it also is very beneficial in improving the clarity of the water, as well as providing food for ducks and any other number of variety of animals. And it also releases oxygen into the water column. So when we talk about algae, there are 39,000 different types of algae. And so it's just insane to even try to categorize or classify algae, but I'm going to attempt to do it here. And just think of the water column as a barbershop pole. And so you have some algae living on the bottom, you have some algae living throughout the water column, and then you have some algae that is at the surface. And so this picture that we see here, this is an aerial photograph of Harper's Ferry, and it's a confluence of the Potomac and the Shenandoah River. And so at the center top, you see the Potomac flowing down, and it's running very clear and looks very nice. And on your center left is with the Shenandoah coming in, and you see that this pea green soup. And what that is, that's planktonic algae. That's algae that flows through the entire water column. And it can be very detrimental to fisheries and to fish habitat. Planktonic algae can be so fine that it can literally coat the gills of fish and make it difficult for them to survive. And so this is a form of algae that cuts across the entire water column. Here's a picture of what a lot of people think of when they think of algae, filamentous algae, sort of that long mermaid grass that you would see and pick up big glops and throw at your brothers and sisters and things like that. And so that's filamentous algae. And then you have bottom dwelling algae, periphyton algae that coats the river bottom, and it makes a thick blanket. If you would walk on this in your bare feet, it would feel very scratchy, almost like you're walking on a Brillo pad. And then in addition to sort of the periphyton algae, you can also have blue-green algae that oftentimes will start on the river bottom, and depending upon the time of day will rise to the surface. And when it rises to the surface, this is what it often looks like, blue-green algae. This picture was taken on the South Fork of the Shenandoah. And when we went in and paddled in to take a photograph of it, we literally had to hold our breath because the smell of ammonia was so strong that it was difficult to breathe. And oftentimes in the summer months, you'll have blue-green algae that starts on the bottom, and inside the algal system are these little air sacs, and these air sacs will warm up and heat up, and they'll rise to the surface. And so this algae will rise up, and oftentimes it smells awful. Some people mistake it for, that there's a break in someone's septic pipe or something like that. It can be that strong. And so, we just talked about why, subaquatic vegetation is good. So why is algae, bad? Well, oftentimes, algae is just a normal part of the biosystem. And so in and of itself, algae is neither good nor bad. It just is. But when you get too much algae in the river, nuisance algae, it can have an impact upon fishing and paddling. Here's a picture of the North Fork of the Shenandoah. And you can see that, really not too many people are going to want to paddle that and, bring up a big blade full of salad on every paddle stroke. And you certainly don't want to fish in there, because every time you cast your line, you're going to be just reeling back just a big glob of gunk. And so in and of itself, just nuisance algae, can impair the river because it negatively impacts your ability to enjoy the river from a recreational standpoint. But algae does more than just that. You also can have harmful algal blooms. And harmful algal blooms are when you have this large mass of algae and it starts to die off. And when that happens, it consumes all of the oxygen in the area. And the benthic creatures, the little critters living at the bottom, and as well as the fish, they either have to move or die. And because there is very low levels of oxygen in the river, and it's oftentimes the source of fish kills. And these can happen fairly quickly in the system, depending upon the time of day and how much nutrients there are in the river, the nitrogen and the phosphorus. And so it also makes it extremely difficult to for fish and crayfish to live on the river bottom because of this thick blanket that exists on the bottom. And so it makes it just very difficult and very challenging. And if you're paddling down the river and you see just a thick blanket of algae on the bottom, I often encourage people just to sort of move on if you can, and to get past it. A lot of times you'll see it in lower flow areas of the river, pools and eddy pockets and things like that. And this does a couple of things. It allows the water temperature to heat up in that area. It also brings in nutrients, and then there's plenty of sunlight. And so it makes for a perfect recipe for harmful algal blooms to occur. And then besides harmful algal blooms, there can be another level of algae, and I'm not really certain. Let me see if this does. Toxic algal blooms, and toxic algal blooms. In addition to there being harmful algal blooms, a toxic algal bloom distinguishes itself by blue-green algae. And blue-green algae, a more accurate name is cyanobacteria, and scientists aren't really certain why, but cyanobacteria can release toxins into the water, microsystems. And when this happens, it can be very dangerous for livestock that are down on the water's edge drinking it. Any pets that consume it, it can be very dangerous for pets, especially dogs, because they can run around and ingest a bunch of water very quickly, and it's absorbed very quickly into their system. And as well as humans, a few years back, there were toxic algal blooms up on the Lake Erie in the Toledo area that caused them to shut their water intakes down for 3 days. And then the year after that, on the Ohio River, there was a 600-mile long toxic algal bloom that was working its way down the river. And cities and towns were shutting off their water intakes as that was going on. But it also can happen, toxic algal blooms on the Shenandoah on a much smaller level. It doesn't need to be miles long or even hundreds of yards long, but it can take place, and the cyanobacteria can be released in a fairly small area of water. This is a picture of a woman. She was out tubing with some of her friends, and they were just messing around on a weekend day, like lots of people do when they're enjoying the river, and they were throwing seaweed at one another. And someone picked up a glop off the bottom and threw it on her leg, and it just attached to the side of her knee and thigh. And then they sat down and were just sitting there, and she had some of it still on her leg. And then when she removed it, she had this to contend with. And so cyanobacteria and microsystem toxins can be, dangerous, for all animals and livestock and pets, and as well as humans, even if you don't ingest the water. And then another reason why algae can be bad for the Shenandoah River, it's really sort of bad for the area. It's bad for the economy. People can fish and people can vacation and recreate and swim and paddle pretty much wherever they want. And when the Shenandoah has too much algae in the river, and reports come out that the river is choked with algae, or they can't go fishing because there's just too much algae, people will take their hard-earned dollars and they'll go elsewhere. They may stay in the state, they may stay in the Commonwealth, they may go down to the James or the New or the Rappahannock, or it's just as easy for them to travel a little bit north and go to the Potomac, or a little bit further north in Pennsylvania to Susquehanna, or wherever they want. And so it has the potential to seriously negatively impact the economy of the region. Agriculture is certainly by far the largest economic driver in the Shenandoah Valley, but travel and tourism is not too far behind it. And so it's something that we all need to keep in mind. We've been working with and dealing with algae for over 10 years. And so this is going to get a little wonky, but I'll try to keep it simple. But we made 2 large-scale attempts to get all 3 reaches of the Shenandoah watershed, that's the North Fork, South Fork, and the main stem, placed on the impaired waters list. And the Clean Water Act is a federal law, and it's enforced by the Environmental Protection Agency. And then the EPA allows each of the states to enforce the Clean Water Act. And as part of the Clean Water Act, the states need to submit an impaired waters list to EPA. And this list says the following river systems or the following tributaries are impaired because of, and it can be algae, it can be, excessive nutrients, it can be, low dissolved oxygen, impact on microinvertebrates, whatever the case may be. And so, and this is issued every 2 years. And so we made two very strong attempts and submitted thousands of photographs and hundreds of letters to the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality to get the Shenandoah watershed put on the impaired waters list. And they said essentially no. And in the impaired waters list in the Clean Water Act, states can declare a river or a body of water impaired for one of two reasons. One are nutrient standards. And those are numeric standards that the state can then use to judge the water system against. And the other is a narrative standard, a little bit more difficult standard for folks to say, you know what, my recreation and enjoyment and use has been impaired. I no longer fish there. I no longer, try to engage in fishing to provide for my family, and I go elsewhere, or it's negatively impacting my livelihood or my use and enjoyment of the river. And so when we submitted it the first time to Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, they came back and they said, I'm sorry, these are, this is all a lot of very good information, but there are no numeric standards in the Commonwealth of Virginia for free-flowing streams and rivers. And so we have nothing to judge this against. So then in our next attempt, we came back with hundreds of letters from users, fishermen, anglers, kayakers, paddlers, canoeists, tubers, birders, and explained why their use and enjoyment of the river has been impaired, and we submitted that. And then Virginia DEQ came back and they said, oh my God, this is such a subjective matter. There's no way that we could, make a ruling based upon a narrative standard. And so essentially we were shut down in both instances. And so what you can do is you can file a lawsuit against the EPA. And that's what we did. In 2017, we filed a lawsuit against Scott Pruitt and the EPA for accepting Virginia's impaired waters list and without having the Shenandoah watershed put on it. And if I know there are lots of folks in this call, and I recognize some names and faces and not others, but if there are any folks out there that are part of the Warren County chapter of the Isaac Walton League, mad props to you and your organization, as well as the Potomac River Smallmouth Club, because they stepped up to the plate and they joined us in this lawsuit. And we talked to a lot of other environmental organizations, and everybody was somewhat leery and reluctant to step up to the plate and take their swings. And Isaac Walton League and Potomac River Smallmouth Club, they stepped up with us. And so mad props to both of those organizations. And so this was filed in May of 2017 and federal district court in DC, and we lost. And so we appealed, and we appealed again in the appellate court in DC in May of 2019, and again we lost. And essentially, courts give very broad deference to state agencies and departments in making determinations about what they oversee. And so the fact of the matter is that we lost, and we were disappointed, and we felt that we had a very strong case. And we also felt that the appellate court really provided the blueprint for any other state to never have to act on algae or nutrients, because they said that Virginia doesn't have numeric limits, and so there's nothing they can do about that, and that our thousands of photographs and hundreds of letters, it left the court wanting for more information. And so, you know, we sort of tucked our tail and came back home. But having said that, of all of the activities that we have undertaken and all of the projects that we've done and campaigns that we've pursued, if we were going to lose on any of these issues or any of these projects, I would want to lose in the court on this, only because we have gotten so much done as we pursued both of these the lawsuits against the EPA. Nothing was being done in Virginia DEQ until we filed these lawsuits. And after that, they stood up the Shenandoah Algae methodology study. They started taking more serious the complaints. They then started regularly visiting 5 locations on the Shenandoah system, 3 on the North Fork, the Deer Park, Timberville, and Strasburg, and over on the South Fork, Rileyville and Bentonville. And we're very happy for that. We applaud DEQ for doing that. But algae occurs throughout the watershed. It doesn't occur at 5 convenient ramps where people can drive down to the ramp and get out of their vehicle and take a look and see what they are seeing. And so obviously more needs to be done. And while all of this is going on, we're seeing an increased amount of poultry operations in the whole Shenandoah Valley. Right now, from Virginia Poultry Federation, you know, their own records, Virginia produces 279 million chickens a year. I did not misstate that figure, 279 million chickens. Throw in another 17 million turkeys. And then we have about 580,000 head of cattle in the Shenandoah Valley. And so there's a lot of poultry litter being produced and a lot of cattle manure being produced. And so if, you know, that is being handled responsibly and it's being put on fields that need those nutrients, that's great. But if the poultry litter is being spread on fields that are already saturated with phosphorus, and poultry litter is very heavy with phosphorus, it just becomes a convenient waste disposal system because the soil cannot hold on to the phosphorus. And so the next heavy rain, the next snowstorm, whatever comes down, it will just release that phosphorus and the nitrogen that's not picked up by the soil into the water. And so, you know, we keep working hard and we keep pressing. And so in 2019 and 2020, we got together and met with stakeholders of the river, agriculture and farmers and Virginia Poultry Federation and travel and tourism and state government and local government, state parks and the Shenandoah National Park. And we created this vision and this roadmap for the preservation and protection of the Shenandoah River system. And the name was, we ended up with the Shenandoah Watershed Compact. And then in November of 2019, we had a conversation with the outfitters, Front Royal Outdoors and Downriver Canoe and Shenandoah River Outfitters and Harpers Ferry Adventure Center, and we had a conversation with them about, you know, algae in the river and what we want to do. But we also wanted to get their sort of blessing that, you know, we weren't going to harm their businesses. And it's a fine line that needed to be walked. And to an organization, they said, keep doing what you're doing. You know, we hope that we don't go out of business in the process, but try to make any kind of campaign as respectful as possible. And so, you know, from that's where we stood up this idea of creating the Respect the Shenandoah Campaign. And we've also been working very closely with national organizations. We've been working with the Environmental Integrity Project, and they came out with a report back in 2017 looking at water pollution due to livestock in the Shenandoah Valley and the negative impact it's having on the health of the river system. And then 2 years after that, we had another report that came out looking at the number of head of cattle that are entering the Shenandoah River and the need for livestock fencing. And the work that we did, where we determined in our efforts that only about 20% of the cattle farms in the Rappahannock, or I'm sorry, in Rockingham County, were keeping their cattle out of the river. And so the Environmental Integrity Project, they did a similar study in Augusta County, and their numbers were almost identical to ours. And so there's been a lot of work done. And I want to show you two slides here, and they've been produced by the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. And it's an interesting couple of slides, because between now and 2025, you're going to see a miracle happen. And the important lines on this is for Virginia nitrogen loads. This is across the state, not just the Shenandoah Valley, but across the state. And you see dramatic reductions. That blue line, I know I don't know, depending upon how the camera is portraying people on the screen, maybe blocking it, but the blue line shows dramatic reduction. That's stormwater reduction in the Commonwealth. And so you see significant, progress being made in stormwater reduction in nitrogen, and that's due to ratepayers paying the freight essentially and improving their wastewater treatment plants and stormwater, and so you see this dramatic reduction. And the top orange line that you see that starts at the 20 million pound level, that's the agriculture. And so roughly from 2009 to 2019, we have seen next to no reductions in nitrogen loads in the Commonwealth of Virginia due to agricultural improvements and their best management programs. And so it's just shocking that so little has been done. And quite honestly, as a taxpayer, there's a lot of money being put into agricultural best management programs with little to show for it. So let's take a look at phosphorus. And in phosphorus, again, you see dramatic reductions in that blue line, which is stormwater and wastewater treatment plants. And the orange line, again, is agriculture. And you see next to no reductions in phosphorus loads in the Commonwealth of Virginia over the last 10 years. And what little reduction you do see, I would argue, is made as a result of Virginia taking phosphorus out of fertilizers that you can buy at big box stores, from Home Depot and Lowe's. And so you no longer can just automatically just buy a generic bag of fertilizer that has a fairly heavy phosphorus load. There's no phosphorus in that. And so these are significant, issues that are going on. And so we've been trying to get the Department of Environmental Quality to step up to the plate and actually start doing something to address the agricultural shortcomings in the Shenandoah Valley. And so our current situation that's going on right now is, we submitted over 60 algal complaints 2 seasons ago, back in 2019. And if we had the staffing to do it, we probably could have submitted 360 algal complaints in 2019. Algae was everywhere on all 3 reaches of the Shenandoah. Last year, we had slightly better flows. And so we did see a reduction in the algal complaints for 2020. We also had a major win in Richmond, getting cattle herds out of the river, but we're still concerned about just poultry production continuing to rise and what's being done with cattle manure and poultry litter. One other thing that did happen was in October of this past year, we met with the director of the environmental quality, Dr. David Paler, and we've been going at it with DEQ for some time, trying to get DEQ to address nutrients in the river. And so during this meeting, or at this meeting, David Paler said that DEQ is getting ready to release chlorophyll A standards for the Shenandoah River system. And chlorophyll A a substitute for nitrogen and phosphorus. Chlorophyll A needs both nitrogen and phosphorus in order for algal blooms to occur and for algae to grow. And the state also has a bit of a track record using chlorophyll A standards from down on the James River. So nonetheless, this was a major stepping stone for us to get DEQ to agree to announce that they're going to come out with these chlorophyll A standards. At the time, they said they were going to be released by Thanksgiving, and then Thanksgiving became the end of the year, and it's now February, and they said that they're going to embed the chlorophyll A standards, draft standards, into the Virginia Triennial Review, which is supposed to come out in the next few weeks. So we are definitely waiting to take a very close look at these chlorophyll A standards, because in the conversation that we had with Director Paler, they were talking about, first they were going to focus on filamentous algae, and which is perhaps a good first step, and we can definitely quibble over it, but there are legitimate concerns about letting blue-green algae, cyanobacteria, go and be unaddressed in these chlorophyll A standards, because they're the ones that can hurt livestock. They're the ones that can kill your pets, that can harm people, and potentially impact the ability of a small town like Edinburgh or Woodstock to pull water out of the North Fork of the Shenandoah due to a toxic algal bloom going on. So, just to touch base just very quickly on this major legislative victory I alluded to. Last year, we got Senate Bill 704 passed, which sets December 31st in 2025 as a voluntary deadline to get all cattle herds out of Virginia rivers and perennial streams. And if not, it will become mandatory, and also to have significant improvements in nutrient management plans. Those are plans where farms are using poultry litter and cattle manure on the land to make certain that the cropland is in need of that material and not just being dumped on. And so a few minutes ago, I talked about the Shenandoah Watershed Compact and getting together all of the stakeholders together, and we created the Shenandoah Watershed Compact. We led it, but we weren't the writers or the arbiters of it. It was over 100 stakeholder community members and organizations that participated. And at the end of the day, this vision and roadmap that we came up with was sort of an inward-looking document as to what each of the stakeholder communities could do. And, we the people, we the farmers, this is what we can do, working together, demonstrate by word and deed, their understanding and appreciating of the river, what legislators could do and what landowners could do in terms of creating riparian buffers. And so out of that, we came up with this idea of the Respect the Shenandoah Campaign. And as I mentioned, this was in conversation and consultation with the outfitters and trying to call attention to algal blooms and heavy algal impacts on all three reaches of the Shenandoah. And so we came up with these 5 goals. One, of course, we want to reduce the algal outbreaks, in the river system and raise public awareness, which I'm trying to do, here this evening. And then one of our goals was to get all cattle herds fenced out by 2025. And when we came out with the campaign, little did we know that the legislator was going to, throw us a gigantic bone and, pass this legislation for that to happen. And then the established new regulation and improve old ones is also happening with the improvements to nutrient management plans. And then finally, we wanted, through the Respect the Shenandoah campaign, we want to develop a body of evidence that we can provide to DEQ to show them visually, this is the impact that algae is making on the Shenandoah water system. And so our approach for the Respect the Shenandoah campaign was to create a web page that DEQ and users of the river and could go to the web page, and it's on our Shenandoah Riverkeeper page, to visually see where algal blooms are occurring. And we created this water reporter map identifying algal locations. And, we want to keep this constant drumbeat of pressure through social media and print media and, having people come out and report on what's going on the river to try to protect the river and try to keep it clean and healthy for, our kids and for future generations. And we want to compel DEQ to make this happen. And so what we did is we came up with an app that you can pull down off of your smartphone, your iPhone, your Android, whatever. And it's called the Water Reporter. And it's free. You pull it down, you create your own account, you join the Potomac Riverkeeper network. And then that's it. And then you just bring your phone along with you. And if you're floating down the river, if you're hiking along the shore, if you're doing some birding or you're fishing from shore or whatever, and you come across your favorite fishing hole or your favorite paddle spot, and you see this massive, algal bloom going on, you can just pull out your phone, you open your Water Reporter, you just click where you start a new post, snap a photo or two, and then you can write a blurb to provide some additional information. And we would prefer 1 or 2 photos. Ideally, it's best to have a photo sort of going horizontally across the river so that you can show the expanse of the algae that you're encountering. And then one either upstream or downstream, and then preferably, one looking directly down upon the algal event itself. And so you can get an idea of just how massive or how small this algal bloom is that you're encountering. And then you just add the hashtag Respect the Shenandoah. And what that does is that it immediately sends the submission to us, and it allows us to populate the map. And so this is from our Potomac Riverkeeper network and the Shenandoah Riverkeeper page. And this is from last year. And you see the circles where algal bloom submissions were provided to us. And then the little blue, I'm going to mess up my geometry, diamonds, rhombus, whatever the little blue figures are, those are water gauge sites. And so if you would click on one of the water gauge sites, you would be able to pull up the current conditions. And so what we're trying to do is to drive people to use the map on a regular basis to see if there are any algal blooms and their favorite stretch where they want to paddle or fish, and also get an indication of what the water levels are at the time. And then if you click on one of the submissions, you can pull up and you can see the photograph. And this one was generated by Alan Lehman. And, algae is blooming in early August in this area of the North Fork of the Shenandoah below Catlett's Ford. And this was submitted on August 6th at 5:38 p.m. And so what we're really trying to do here is to expand our eyes and ears and to get people and stakeholders and lovers of the river interested and involved and to, maintain constant awareness and vigilance about what they're seeing on the river. And by doing so, we make a much more compelling argument to the Department of Environmental Quality that more needs to be done. And in fairness to DEQ, for the last number of years, they've been overworked and understaffed, and they're struggling to do everything that's in their portfolio. But last year, as part of the whole watershed improvement plans on the part of the General Assembly, they passed close to $100 million in agricultural best management practice improvements. And because of COVID, they held about $40 million in abeyance. And just this evening, in fact, just like minutes before I came on board, there was a report that came out that there's legislation that has just been submitted in the budget in Virginia to start addressing that $40 million shortfall to try to help agriculture improve water quality and by engaging in agricultural best management practices. I don't mean by any stretch to beat up upon agriculture. They're in a really difficult situation at times. Dairy farmers, they're operating not in a Virginia market, not in a regional market. They're operating in an international market. And there are times it's very difficult for dairy farmers to get the dollars that they need to engage in some of these improvements. And this is where these funds come in. In the same way with, with some of the poultry farmers. But the fact of the matter is that the river is used by all of us, not just by the agricultural community, and other businesses and other people that use and enjoy the river should not have to suffer as a result of agricultural activity. And so, I just want to just go through very quickly, some of the other work that we do in terms of river access and recreation, and to help, asking you to help spread the word. On the left is just a photo of a river cleanup where we, this past spring, we pulled out, I don't know, it was like 23 tires, and we found a Don's John on the shoreline that we broke up with a electrical reciprocating saw. Unfortunately, the reservoir was not there. But we pull out incredible number of tires every year. And on the right was a snorkeling trip that we did, engaged in best management practices with everybody socially, distance. And so what's in store for 2021 for our organization? A continuation of the Respect the Shenandoah campaign. 2 years ago, I did a smallmouth bass health assessment on the mid-Atlantic rivers. I'm trying to make that happen again. Anybody that fishes the river knows that smallmouth bass fishing has been down for the last few years. And so, what's being done about that? What are the causes of that? There's a lot of really interesting scientific work that's being done, and we're bringing together the biologists from the Shenandoah, from the James, from the Potomac, the upper Potomac in West Virginia, and also the Susquehanna River system, because so many of the mid-Atlantic rivers are all experiencing very similar events. We're also going to be working very hard on legislative and regulatory work. We plan on spending a lot of time on this chlorophyll A standards and trying to get the best possible standards possible for the Shenandoah. We're moving our cattle herd work, trying to get cattle out of the rivers. I mean, I know by 2025, we want to get cattle out of all Virginia rivers and perennial streams, but we've been working hard at that. When we first started, there were approximately 75 cattle herds on all three reaches of the Shenandoah, and that number is down to about single digits. And so now we're going to expand our work into the upper reaches of the Shenandoah system on the North River, Middle River, and South River. And then we plan on conducting a compliance sweep this spring, looking at all the violators of point source pollution in the Shenandoah Valley. And over the course of 2019 and 2020, there were approximately 358 permit violations from 53 different permit holders. Some of those are minor, some of those are not minor. And so we're going to be taking a close look at that. And then some of the fun stuff that we do that I really enjoy, that everybody loves, is getting out on the water for River Palooza, which is a paddling series across the course of the summer, and Rio Palooza, which is an outreach to our Latino community to get them to come out and to enjoy the use of the river and to learn a little bit more about it and what they can do to protect it. It's a bilingual event. These are just some more pretty pictures of River Palooza events, and showing you just the health of the river. And in terms of next steps, I really encourage everybody, take the time, download the Water Reporter app and to use it or to pass it. If you don't have a smartphone or you don't use it that often, ask your kids, ask your grandkids. They certainly use it. They use the apps. And we really want to build support at the grassroots level to protect the Shenandoah and to preserve it for future generations. We live in an amazingly beautiful area. And the fact that we're letting this, get away from us is just unacceptable. And, our biggest challenge, people ask me this, what's the biggest challenge? Is it poultry? Is it cattle? Is it legacy toxins? Is it climate change? Here's a picture just looking at filamentous algae, and there's probably some blue-green algae in there as well. Our biggest challenge, quite honestly, it's complacency. It's a part of our people, our neighbors, our communities, our governments to just be okay with what the river is and how it's being nickel and dime to death. And really the biggest challenge is to get everyone to be less complacent and to do their part, to stand up and let their voice be heard. Our elected officials, they need to hear from this and hear from us. And when they get ready to run for office, we need to be asking them hard questions. What are you doing to protect the Shenandoah River? What are you doing to protect the businesses that rely upon a clean, healthy Shenandoah water system? And so that's what I really encourage everybody to do, is to come away, is to download the Water Reporter app and to go back and to tell your friends. And if any of you are associated with other organizations or environmental groups, I'm happy to spread the word and to talk more. And so with all of that, let me just get out of here, and I'm happy to answer any questions that everybody has. But I just wanted to go through from here and to shed a little light on our Respect the Shenandoah campaign. So I don't know if anybody has any questions, but I'm happy to answer any and all of them.
I actually have a question. I've heard a lot. This is totally new to me, but I'm curious as to, are there measures that are being taken to actually remove the algae from the river, and what might they be?
No, it's, in some, like if you had a small pond or something like that, you could physically remove the algae from the river, but it's just not economically feasible to go in and to remove the algae. The algae will oftentimes, it will just pop up and appear. You could have 3 days of warm weather in July, and the river has just been beautiful, and all of a sudden algae will just form, and it will be there for 2, 3, 5 days a week, 2 weeks, and then it can just disappear. And because there's no root structure with the algae, oftentimes it does move downstream.
I see.
But it would just be very difficult to remove the algae and for any appreciable level.
That was going to be my question.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, Dave
Yeah.
Borger here. I have a question.
Yeah.
How can we get Virginia to change their numerical limits on some of these standards?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we've been fighting for 10 years. And so that's why this, this chlorophyll A standard is so important to us, because it's going to be the first time that there will be some kind of numeric standards put forth. I'm happy that they're doing something, but I'm a little concerned that, is it going to be the bare minimum? I'm also concerned that they're just going to be focusing on filamentous algae, which of all the algae is probably the least, it has the potential for least harm. It can negatively impact fishing and recreation and paddling, but filamentous algae in and of itself it is not going to cause, a harmful algal bloom, or it's less likely to cause a harmful algal bloom, and it certainly will not cause a blue-green, toxic algal bloom. And so that's why we're all sort of waiting to take a very close look at it. We're working with Chesapeake Bay Foundation, with the scientists there, working with the James River Association down on the James River, and others, because we're all interested to see what these standards are actually going to be.
And if I could just follow up on that.
Sure. Yeah.
I know years ago, Friends of the North Fork and Friends of the Shenandoah River, they would routinely pull samples.
Correct.
And they would measure a variety of parameters. But I'm guessing without those standards at the state level, those numbers really don't mean a whole lot, right?
That's correct. I'm on the board of the Friends of the Shenandoah River, and in fact, we had a board meeting yesterday, and we were talking about just that. And and the board takes it, and the board, I'm sorry, DEQ takes the information, and it looks at it, and it's great from sort of a baseline scientific study, but in terms of holding, you know, anyone's feet to the fire, or even acting on it, it's non-existent, because there are no nutrient standards in the Commonwealth of Virginia for free-flowing streams.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, Mark,
Sure.
what's under, I was just trying to sign into the app, and I've signed into the app, and now I'm looking for the organization. What organization would this be under? Shenandoah River?
Potomac Riverkeeper Network.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah. Hey there, Jay.
How are you doing?
Good.
Is there any chance they're going to require more farms or farmers to submit to nutrient management plans, or is it just going to be CAFOs?
No, the nutrient management plans are reportedly going to be strengthened, and one of the things that we were trying to pursue and failed last year was to get essentially any farm that uses poultry litter or cattle manure, they need to have a nutrient management plan developed, showing an agronomic need for that material. And what we wanted is for the farmers and for the you know, ranchers and whoever's using it to submit it to DEQ, to have it on file, and so the state could actually do something with it. And the Farm Bureau, they pushed very hard back, saying that that was an onerous burden, even though it was probably just a couple of mouse clicks away from having that done. So now these nutrient management plans are supposed to be accomplished and filled out with an agronomic need, but quite honestly, no one knows if that's being done, and so it's just a real shortfall. And the other shortfall was that nutrient management plans were required if they were raising, if a farm was raising poultry or cattle, but farms that were just simply, you know, engaged in hay production or some other crops, no nutrient management plan was needed to be on file. And so it was sort of a black hole as to where is all this material going, and how
Exactly.
how is it being applied. And so you know, that's a fight that, you know, we're still engaged in to try to get all the nutrient management plans strengthened, because it's a real shortcoming right now.
There's no public access to that information anyway, right?
Correct. Yes, that's correct. There's Environmental Integrity Project tried getting access to that, and they just got aggregate figures of, you know, how many nutrient management plans were submitted from each county, but it's little that you can do with that information.
Okay. Thanks, Mark.
Sure.
Mark, we have a question in the chat asking about if people want to support your organization in your efforts, either by contributing financially or doing volunteer work, what's the best way to get engaged?
Sure. I mean, if someone wants to contribute to us financially, that's wonderful. They can just go to our Potomac Riverkeeper Network page, just potomacriverkeeper.org. And at the top of that page, there's a giant red donate button. Make it nice and easy for everyone. If you want to volunteer, you can send me an email, or you know, go through the web page. My email address is just mark@shenandoahriverkeeper.org. Right now, we are trying to find the right balance with COVID of, you know, doing river cleanups while still, you know, ensuring that people are remaining safe. And we did a couple of cleanups last year, but quite honestly, we did them with staff, and we did them with some fishing guides who, you know, are accustomed to working on the river, and you know, we were guarantee that we can maintain, proper safety protocols. So we're just a little bit concerned about that as to how do we go about doing that. But we are certainly planning on, hopefully everybody will get vaccinated by the summer months. And we are, planning ahead for our River Palooza events, and we always need volunteers for that. And Rio Palooza, it's a fun one-day event where we invite, really it's just a bilingual event. We just ensure that Spanish-speaking folks are on hand and encourage Latino communities to come out, but they can go fishing, they can go swimming and tubing, they can be exposed to any number of different environmental groups. 2 years ago, because we held off on doing Rio Palooza, we had Mr. G, who was a Latin Grammy Award-winning band. He came and performed, and we are trying to nail him down for this September as well. So we definitely have a need for volunteers for Rio Palooza events, as well as cleanups. And then the other thing that is very beneficial and very helpful is to have people, and they can do it safely at home, is to write letters supporting or opposing legislation. We write lots of letters, putting forth our views, and they are read and they're, acknowledged and, all the appropriate head nods. But when legislators get letters from ordinary citizens saying that they support this bill because, or they oppose this bill because, they stand up and take notice. And so it's very helpful and very beneficial to have folks do that. It doesn't need to be some 2-page, long-winded letter. Quite honestly, just short and sweet and to the point is very helpful.
Mark, Dave again, do you all post that legislation on your website?
When it's important, we do. When we need support, we do. And we also send out, it's a vertical response. It's just sort of like an action letter that goes out to our members saying, heads up, they're getting ready to vote on this bill or that bill. We would really appreciate you reaching out to your respective legislator and supporting or opposing it. So we do that.
Thank you.
Mark, I have a follow-up question on the donation.
Sure.
Where is most of your funding coming from at this point?
Yeah, it comes from sort of 2 large buckets.
Okay.
One bucket are from foundations,
Okay.
Keith Campbell Fund, Hopewell, and a number of other foundations that are dedicated and committed to protecting either the Chesapeake Bay watershed or our river systems. And then the other large bucket are from our members and donors.
I see.
And that's how we live and exist.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mark?
Yes.
I just have one other question. Have you guys had any discussion or feedback on the recent regulatory change for the river access points where you have to have either fishing license or
yeah, and again, that just sort of came out today. Essentially, last year, a piece of legislation got passed, and in a nutshell, it said that anyone using a Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources ramp would have to pay an access fee unless you were a current Virginia fishing or hunting license holder. And so in and of itself, that wasn't necessarily that bad, but the way that the legislation was worded, it goes to the individual, and it's having a dramatic negative impact on outfitters, because anytime that an outfitter would show up with, say, 30 people on their bus, they would be responsible for paying that $3 or $4 access fee. Or and tubes were also going to be captured by that legislation. So if mom, dad, and 3 or 4 little munchkins came out with their tubes and they're at, say, Cairo boat landing in the very soft and safe water, and they're just, playing about in that, all of a sudden, theoretically they could get hit with a, $20 or $30 access fee to use the river for a couple of hours. And so what we have been working on and trying to, with Virginia Conservation Network and others, is to get that legislation put on hold, the piece that was passed. And so a budget amendment just got submitted today that would essentially free Department of Wildlife Resources from enforcing that. And it may be that instead of an individual fee, it would be a small fee per car, or that for the outfitters and guides, that there would be a commercial outfitter license fee that would provide them access. It was particularly disappointing in some respects, like Front Royal Outdoors. Don Roberts, he lives in the area in Warren County, and Don and his folks, they take it upon themselves to clean up 3, 4, 5 times a year Caro boat landing, and to make it much better than what it normally would be. They've brought in gravel on their own to add additional increased number of parking spaces. When the river was blocked due to a high flood last year, they got that cleared out, and then all of a sudden, here's the state asking them to then pay for that privilege of doing that. And so I don't think it was the intent, quite honestly, on the part of the legislator. I think it was just poorly worded, and I think because of COVID and everything else that was going on, it snuck through, and it didn't get the eyes on it that needed to be gotten on it. And so it looks like, for the 2021 season, there will be no fees assessed. Well, at least that's what we hope is going to happen, and that better language can be written to incorporate that, to make it a little bit more fair and equitable. Because there's also sort of an environmental justice component to it, and that some of the people that don't have access to swim clubs or other resources and activities, the rivers, it's their swimming hole, it's their backyard, it's their home, and they may not be able to pay a daily fee of $3 or $4 every time they want to go to the river. And so we're looking to see what can be done to make it a little bit more fair and equitable.
Yeah, I agree with that. Part of the problem, though, is that a lot of their funding comes from hunting and fishing licenses.
Right.
We're going to have to replace that, or we're going to have to get some sort of general funding.
Yep, I know. I completely agree. I completely agree that you're seeing a reduction in the number of fishing licenses and hunting licenses being sold, which is putting a crimp on DWR at the very time, because of the pandemic. More pressure is being put on them to just maintain what they currently have. Locks Landing, which is up in Clark County. If you would ever go to Locks Landing on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, you would be appalled at the amount of garbage that would just be piled in a pyramid there just because of its heavy use. And so DWR, they entered trash cleanup contracts with vendors, and they thought it was going to be X, and it's like X plus 40%. And so it's a real challenge for them to maintain that. And also, quite honestly, there are some users of the river system that aren't carrying their weight. And I don't know how to explain it, but I mean, like, for example, many of the boat ramps are built using fishing license and hunting license sales, but there are lots of birders that enjoy the river immensely and enjoy going to the river to see migratory shorebirds, to see great blue herons, to see whatever, and they're using the resource without contributing to it. And oftentimes, I'm going to use a broad sweeping stroke and generalization, and it's always at one's peril to do that, but there are a lot of birders that are fairly well off in our community, and they have the very nice and the latest in binoculars and glasses and cameras and lenses and everything. But in terms of accessing the resource itself, they get away unscathed. And I'm
So
a
once
birder and I love birding, but my birder friends need to step up to the plate.
So one suggestion maybe to the state, because I use a lot of those resources, and when I went to the state to figure out how do I get a license, I neither fish nor hunt. But what I figured out is that as a senior now, I got a fishing license, a lifetime one, so that I could go to Thompson when the Trillium are out and have my certificate. Why not have a wildlife permit one that would make it easier for people who enjoy the areas for just kayaking or for birding to be able to pay their part, so that they're not confused or off put by saying I need it. And I figured out that the fishing license was cheaper than the hunting license or something, but
That's true.
you know, but there should be something, to your point, that allows people who like to recreate and use the resource to feel like they could sign up to use it in a way that fits for them.
Right.
Don't they have a, Mark, don't they have a conservation something? No.
No,
Yeah, I don't believe so.
not when I signed up like 2 years ago, because you know I don't want to like have to scurry off the trail when I'm seeing Trillium and say, uh-oh, you caught me here.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that, Sharon.
Well, it's a huge impact for the outfitters, though. They got to come up with some sort of plan for them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, their window to make their money for the year is very small. It's a very small window. It's just not fair to them.
All right, just wondering if you guys had heard anything.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Mark.
Yeah.
So it sounds like if there are other questions, comments. I want to thank you, Mark, and I'm going to end with a little story because I think the Shenandoah is really special. I was doing some international training for Department of State, and I was in the Philippines, and I was introducing the team, and I was showing, like, one person was from Oklahoma, and I showed a picture of the river. And when I said it was the Shenandoah River, the people in the Philippines burst into, of course, singing about the Shenandoah River, but they looked at me with these really wide eyes and they said, "It's real?" And so we have this incredible resource, as Mark started by saying, we live in this wonderful place with this wonderful river. And I really appreciated your comment about, we need to step up and not be complacent about this resource that we all love. So, I really thank you for bringing attention to this and not taking it for granted. It is really a precious resource.
Well, thank you very much, Sharon. And again, I know that I'm preaching to the choir here because here's everybody sitting on a Wednesday evening with snow coming down and everything, and you guys are here front and center to listen to this. So thank you very much for your time. You could be anywhere, but you're here, and I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks again, everybody. And if you know people that would enjoy this presentation, it will be on the website. Again, if you have programs that you can think about from your different groups to co-sponsor, like this one, or continuing programs about the river, please get in touch. The Friends of the Samuels Public Library, we're also a volunteer group, and so we appreciate any support that you can give us for the different programs that we've been doing. So thank you all for joining us and being with us. And I really appreciate it, Mark. You did a great presentation, and I hope that people do take steps to support your efforts.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Yep. Thanks, guys. Bye. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark.
Yep. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.